Chapter 23 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 23. Mr. Richard Swiveller, wending homeward from the wilderness, for such was the appropriate name of Quilp's choice retreat, after a sinuous and corkscrew fashion, with many checks and stumbles, after stopping suddenly and staring about him, then as suddenly running forward for a few paces, and as suddenly halting again and shaking his head, doing everything with a jerk, and nothing by premeditation. Mr. Richard Swiveller, wending his way homeward after this fashion, which is considered by evil-minded men to be symbolical of intoxication, and is not held by such persons to denote that state of deep wisdom and reflection in which the actor knows himself to be, began to think that possibly he had misplaced his confidence, and that the dwarf might not be precisely the sort of person to whom to entrust a secret of such delicacy and importance. And being led and tempted on by this remorseful thought into a condition which the evil-minded class before referred to would term the maudlin state or stage of drunkenness, it occurred to Mr Swiveller to cast his hat upon the ground and moan, crying aloud that he was an unhappy orphan, and that if he had not been an unhappy orphan, things had never come to this. "Left an infant by my parents at an early age," said Mr Swiveller, bewailing his hard lot, "cast upon the world in my tenderest period, and thrown upon the mercies of a deluding dwarf. Who can wonder at my weakness? Here's a miserable orphan for you here," said Mr Swiveller, raising his voice to a high pitch and looking sleepily around. "Here's a miserable orphan."
"Then," said somebody hard by, "let me be a father to you." Mr Swiveller swayed himself to and fro to preserve his balance, and, looking into a kind of haze which seemed to surround him, at last perceived two eyes dimly twinkling through the mist, which he observed after a short time were in the neighbourhood of a nose and mouth. Casting his eyes down towards that quarter in which, with reference to a man's face, his legs are usually to be found, he observed that the face had a body attached, and when he looked more intently, he was satisfied that the person was Mr Quilp, who indeed had been in his company all the time, but whom he had some vague idea of having left a mile or two behind. "You have deceived an orphan, sir," said Mr Swiveller solemnly. "I'm a second father to you," replied Quilp. "You my father, sir?" retorted Dick. "Being all right myself, sir, I request to be left alone instantly, sir." "What a funny fellow you are!" cried Quilp. "Go, sir," returned Dick, leaning against a post and waving his hand. "Go, deceiver. Go. Some day, sir, perhaps you'll waken from pleasure's dream to know the grief of orphans forsaken. Will you go, sir?" The dwarf, taking no heed of this adjuration, Mr Swiveller advanced with the view of inflicting upon him condign chastisement, but forgetting his purpose, or changing his mind before he came close to him, he seized his hand and vowed eternal friendship, declaring with an agreeable frankness that from that time forth they were brothers in everything but personal appearance. Then he told his secret all over again, with the addition of being pathetic on the subject of Miss Wackles, who, he gave Mr Quilp to understand, was the occasion of any slight incoherency he might observe in his speech at that moment, which was attributable solely to the strength of his affection, and not to rosy wine or other fermented liquor. And then they went on, arm in arm, very lovingly together. "I'm as sharp," said Quilp to him at parting, "as sharp as a ferret, and as cunning as a weasel. You bring Trent to me, assure him that I'm his friend, though I fear he a little distrusts me. I don't know why, I've not deserved it. And you've both of you made your fortunes in perspective. 'That's the worst of it,' returned Dick. 'These fortunes in perspective look such a long way off.' 'But they look smaller than they really are on that account,' said Quilp, pressing his arm. 'You have no conception of the value of your prize until you draw close to it. Mark that.' 'D'ye think not?' said Dick. 'Ay, I do. And I am certain of what I say that's better,' returned the dwarf. 'You bring Trent to me. Tell him I'm his friend and yours. Why shouldn't I be?' 'There's no reason why you shouldn't, certainly,' replied Dick. 'And perhaps there are a great many why you should. At least, there would be nothing strange in your wanting to be my friend if you were a choice spirit. But then, you know, you're not a choice spirit.' 'I not a choice spirit?' cried Quilp. 'Devil a bit, sir,' returned Dick. 'A man of your appearance couldn't be. If you're any spirit at all, sir, you're an evil spirit. Choice spirits,' added Dick, smiting himself on the breast, 'are quite a different looking sort of people. You may take your oath of that, sir.' Quilp glanced at his free-spoken friend with a mingled expression of cunning and dislike, and wringing his hand almost at the same moment, declared that he was an uncommon character and had his warmest esteem. With that they parted, Mr Swiveller to make the best of his way home and sleep himself sober, and Quilp to cogitate upon the discovery he had made, and exult in the prospect of the rich field of enjoyment and reprisal it opened to him. It was not without great reluctance and misgiving that Mr Swiveller, next morning, his head racked by the fumes of the renowned Skedam, repaired to the lodging of his friend Trent, which was in the roof of an old house in an old ghostly inn, and recounted by very slow degrees what had yesterday taken place between him and Quilp. Nor was it without great surprise and much speculation on Quilp's probable motives, nor without many bitter comments on Dick Swiveller's folly, that his friend received the tale. 'I don't defend myself, Fred,' said the penitent Richard, 'but the fellow has such a queer way with him, and he's such an artful dog, that first of all he set me upon thinking whether there was any harm in telling him, and while I was thinking, screwed it out of me. If you had seen him drink and smoke as I did, you couldn't have kept anything from him. He's a salamander, you know. That's what he is.' Without inquiring whether salamanders were of necessity good confidential agents, or whether a fireproof man was as a matter of course trustworthy, Frederick Trent threw himself into a chair, and burying his head in his hands, endeavoured to fathom the motives which had led Quilp to insinuate himself into Richard Swiveller's confidence. For that the disclosure was of his seeking, and had not been spontaneously revealed by Dick, was sufficiently plain from Quilp's seeking his company and enticing him away. The dwarf had twice encountered him when he was endeavouring to obtain intelligence of the fugitives. This, perhaps, as he had not shown any previous anxiety about them, was enough to awaken suspicion in the breast of a creature so jealous and distrustful by nature, setting aside any additional impulse to curiosity that he might have derived from Dick's incautious manner. But knowing the scheme they had planned, why should he offer to assist it? This was a question more difficult of solution. But as knaves generally overreach themselves by imputing their own designs to others, the idea immediately presented itself that some circumstances of irritation between Quilp and the old man, arising out of their secret transactions and not unconnected perhaps with his sudden disappearance, now rendered the former desirous of revenging himself upon him by seeking to entrap the sole object of his love and anxiety into a connection of which he knew he had a dread and hatred. As Frederick Trent himself, utterly regardless of his sister, had this object at heart, only second to the hope of gain, it seemed to him the more likely to be Quilp's main principle of action. Once investing the dwarf with a design of his own in abetting them, which the attainment of their purpose would serve, it was easy to believe him sincere and hearty in the cause, and as there could be no doubt of his proving a powerful and useful auxiliary, Trent determined to accept his invitation and go to his house that night, and if what he said and did confirmed him in the impression he had formed, to let him share the labour of their plan,